Every 2 weeks, a piece of your paycheck vanishes. You do not see it hit your checking account, you do not get to spend it, and you certainly do not get to touch it without facing steep penalties from the IRS. It goes into a digital vault called a 401k. For millions of Americans, this system feels less like a wealth-building engine and more like a high-security financial trap. You log into your provider portal, whether it is Fidelity, Vanguard, or Empower, and you are greeted by a confusing pie chart, a slowly ticking number, and a list of financial jargon that looks like it was written in a dead language. There are large cap equity options, target date 2055 funds, and mysterious terms like expense ratios and vesting schedules. Why does it feel like a trap? Because the modern retirement system was designed for institutional efficiency, not individual clarity. In 2006, the Pension Protection Act allowed employers to automatically enroll employees into these plans and default them into pre-selected investments. While this was a massive win for participation rates, it created a generation of accidental investors. According to recent surveys, a staggering number of Americans have no idea what they are actually invested in, let alone what they are paying for the privilege. When you do not understand an investment, you are vulnerable to hidden fees and suboptimal performance. This guide is your escape manual. Before we start decoding the fine print, I want to offer you the best return on investment you will find today. If you find value in these deep dives where we pull back the curtain on the financial industry, hit the subscribe button. It is a zero-cost way to ensure you are the one in control of your money, not the algorithms. Think of it as a small hedge against the complexity of Wall Street. Now, understand this. A 401k is not inherently a trap, it is a tool. But like any tool, if you do not know how to wield it, you can hurt yourself. Most people look at the big, bold number at the top of their statement, and then they stop reading. That is exactly what the system expects you to do. We are going to look deeper because Wall Street relies on your boredom. They count on the fact that you will see a 1% fee and think it is just a rounding error. I have run the numbers, and I can tell you that a 1% fee is a financial weapon of mass destruction. We are going to channel a practical hack perspective today to decode your statement and expose the mathematical reality of where your wealth is actually going. To escape the trap, you first need to understand the map. Grab your most recent 401k statement. Whether it is a physical piece of paper or a PDF, standard statements generally follow a similar, federally regulated format. We start with the account summary, which I like to call the mirage. At the very top, you will see your beginning balance and ending balance. Beneath that, you will see your contributions, the employer match, and the market change. Then, you will likely see a line for fees and expenses. Often, this line is surprisingly small or even reads $0. Here is the first hack. Do not trust the fees line on the summary page. The fees listed on the front page are typically only administrative or record-keeping fees. These are flat fees, maybe $15 a quarter, charged by the platform for keeping the digital lights on. They do not include the investment fees, also known as expense ratios. The real fees are hidden inside the funds themselves and are automatically deducted from your returns before you ever see them. If your statement says you paid $0 in fees last quarter while you are holding an actively managed mutual fund, you are being misled by omission. The front page is an illusion of cheapness designed to keep you from looking at the second page where the real action happens. We need to look past the summary to find the actual leak in your bucket. The next section you will see is the asset allocation pie chart. It divides your money into stocks, bonds, and cash. If you are under the age of 45 and your pie chart shows that you are holding 20 or 30% in bonds or cash, you are likely the victim of a conservative default setting. Now, conventional wisdom says bonds provide stability, and that sounds nice. But stability is often a code word for stagnation when you have a 30-year horizon. Historically, high bond allocations drag down long-term growth significantly. When your money is locked away for decades, short-term stability is actually your enemy. You need aggressive growth to outpace inflation and the rising cost of living. If you did not choose this allocation yourself, the system chose it for you to minimize their liability, not to maximize your wealth. They would rather you have a lower, stable return than a volatile, higher return, because it results in fewer customer service complaints during market dips. But you are not investing for the comfort of the record keeper. You are investing for your future self. If your pie chart looks like it belongs to someone retiring next Tuesday, but you still have 20 years of work left, you are trapped in a low-growth cycle that will cost you hundreds of thousands in the long run. Moving deeper into the statement, we hit the investment detail. This is the roster of the actual funds your money is buying. You will see names like American Funds Growth Fund of America or Vanguard Target Retirement 2055. Next to each fund, you will see the number of shares, the price per share, and the total value. What is conspicuously missing from most default views is the expense ratio. They will tell you how many shares of the ABC Growth Fund you own, but they rarely put the price of owning that fund in bold letters next to it. It is like going to a restaurant where the menu lists the ingredients but hides the prices in a separate document kept in the basement. This is by design. If you saw that one fund cost 10 times more than the one right next to it for the exact same performance, you would switch immediately. I have noticed that the funds with the flashiest names often carry the highest costs. Terms like disciplined, strategic, or opportunistic are frequently used to justify fees that eat your gains. You need to look at this list and realize these are not just names, they are contracts. You are paying a group of people to manage that money, and in many cases, you are paying them to do a job that a simple computer algorithm could do better for a fraction of the cost. Identifying these funds is the first step toward reclaiming your margin. To find out what you are actually paying, you have to dig into the disclosures. By law, the Department of Labor requires plan administrators to provide something called a 404A5 fee disclosure document. This is the real treasure map, but it is usually hidden deep in the Plan Information or Documents tab of your online portal. When you find this document, look for a table titled Investment Options Comparative Chart. This table is the only place where the playing field is level. It lists every single fund available in your plan alongside its historical performance over 1, 5, and 10 years. But the holy grail of this document is the column labelled Gross Expense Ratio. This is expressed as a percentage, like 1.05%, and often as a dollar amount per $1,000 invested. This is the most important number in your entire retirement plan. I want you to log into your portal today and find this specific document. Do not look at the shiny dashboard with the pie charts. Go to the disclosures. Write down the expense ratio for every fund you currently hold. If you see numbers above 0.5%, you have found the leak. Most people never see this document in their entire working lives, which is exactly why the fees stay so high. Once you see the numbers in black and white, the illusion of the free 401k disappears, and you can finally start making moves based on math rather than marketing. If you think that a 1% fee sounds small, wait until you see what it does to your final balance. We are trained to think of 1% as a rounding error. When you buy a shirt and it is 1% off, you do not even notice. But in the world of investing, an expense ratio is not a one-time charge. It is an annual fee charged on your entire account balance every single year, regardless of whether the market went up or down. Even if your investments lose money, the fund managers still take their cut. And here is the part that most people miss. You are not just losing the fee itself, you are losing the compounding interest that money would have generated over 30 years. It is a double hit to your wealth. You are paying for the privilege of having less money to compound. I have run the projections, and the results are terrifying. Because expense ratios are expressed as tiny decimals, the human brain perceives them as insignificant. We focus on the 8% return and ignore the 1% fee, thinking we are still netting 7%. But over a career, that 1% gap can be the difference between retiring in comfort and working 5 extra years. This is the mathematical trap that Wall Street relies on. They know that if they keep the numbers small and the terms confusing, you will never do the long-term multiplication. Let us look at a real-world scenario involving two investors, Sarah and John. Both are 25 years old. Both make $60,000 a year, and both invest $5,000 annually into their 401ks for 40 years. Their underlying investments perform exactly the same, generating an 8% gross return. Sarah does her homework and chooses a low-cost index fund with an expense ratio of 0.05%. Her net annual return is 7.95%. John stays in the default, actively managed fund his company selected, which has a 1.05% expense ratio. His net return is 6.95%. After 40 years, Sarah ends up with $1,273,000. John, on the other hand, finishes with $974,000. The difference is nearly $300,000. John lost more money in fees and lost growth than he actually contributed out of his own pocket over his entire career. He worked just as hard as Sarah, he saved just as much as Sarah, but he essentially handed a $300,000 check to a fund manager for no added value. This is why I say that 1% is a weapon. It looks small on a statement, but it represents nearly 30% of your total life savings being siphoned off. When you see it this way, it is no longer a boring fee. It is a massive transfer of wealth from your pocket to theirs. You do not have to take my word for it. The Securities and Exchange Commission issued a bulletin specifically warning that an ongoing fee of just 1% can slash the total value of your portfolio by nearly 30% over 20 years. The Department of Labor concurs, stating that a 1% difference in fees can reduce a worker's retirement balance by 28% over a 35-year career. To put that in perspective, imagine working a 40-hour week but only getting paid for 30 hours, while the other 10 hours of your labor goes directly to a billionaire in a glass office. That is what a high expense ratio does to your retirement. Now, I have developed a system to track these exact metrics. To help you manage this math and keep your wealth on track, I highly recommend using the official Tom Talks Money personal finance dashboards. I have linked the Ultimate Finance Dashboard in the description. It is the exact tool I use to track my net worth, my budget, and most importantly, my investment growth. It helps you see the big picture so you do not get caught in these small fee traps. Using a system like this is the best way to visualize your progress and ensure you are not the one paying for a fund manager's second home. Once you have the right tools, the math stops being scary and starts being a strategy. To figure out how much you are currently bleeding, you can use what I call the rule of 10. For every $10,000 you have invested, a 1% expense ratio costs you $100 a year in fees. If you have $100,000 invested at a 1.5% ratio, you are paying $1,500 a year in hidden fees. That is a monthly payment of over $100 for a service you might not even be using. And remember, you pay this even in a recession. If your account drops by 20%, they still take their 1.5%. Your goal is to get your weighted average expense ratio as close to zero as possible. Anything below 0.10% is excellent. This is the territory of high-quality index funds. Anything between 0.1 and 0.5 is acceptable, but anything above 0.5% should trigger an immediate review. If you see a 1% or higher fee, that is a financial emergency. It is a slow-motion disaster for your future. I have seen statements where people are paying 2% in fees because they were sold a high commission product disguised as a retirement plan. In those cases, the fees eat almost half of the potential growth. You have to be your own advocate, because the record keeper has no incentive to tell you there is a cheaper option. Knowing that fees destroy wealth is only half the battle. The next step is knowing which funds to pick. If you started a job in the last decade, you are almost certainly in a target date fund. These funds have a year in the title, like 2055 or 2060. They are marketed as a set it and forget it solution, which sounds perfect for a busy professional. The idea is that the fund manages your risk for you, shifting from stocks to bonds as you get older. But here is the trap. Many of these are fund of funds. This means the target date fund does not buy stocks directly. It buys other mutual funds managed by the same company. In some cases, you get hit with a double fee. You pay the expense ratio of the underlying funds, plus a management fee for the target date fund itself. While companies like Vanguard and Fidelity offer low-cost index versions of these, many legacy providers still charge upward of 0.75%. Furthermore, these funds often shift into bonds way too early. If you are 35, you do not need 10% of your money in bonds that are barely beating inflation. You are essentially paying a premium for a one-size-fits-all straitjacket. It assumes every 35-year-old has the same risk tolerance and the same goals. If you want to maximize your wealth, you need to break out of the default and take manual control of your allocation. The other major category in your 401k is actively managed mutual funds. These have flashy names and promises of beating the market. The trap here is the myth of the financial genius. We want to believe that there is a smart guy in a suit who can predict the future. But decades of data from the Spiva scorecard prove a devastating reality. Over a 15-year period, more than 90% of actively managed funds fail to beat a simple, brainless index fund. You are paying a premium fee for a manager who will likely perform worse than a computer algorithm. Many of these funds also carry 12b1 fees, which are literally marketing fees passed on to you. You are paying for the mutual fund company to run commercials to find more customers. It is absurd when you think about it. You are subsidizing their growth at the expense of your own. If you see funds in your plan with words like growth, blue chip, or Magellan, check the fee. If it is high, you are likely paying for an expensive underperformer. The financial industry is one of the only industries where you often get less when you pay more. In the stock market, cost is not a proxy for quality. Cost is a drag on performance. The most successful investors are often the ones who stop trying to find the needle and just buy the whole haystack. The escape route from high fees and underperformance is the passive index fund. Instead of paying someone to pick 50 stocks, an index fund uses a computer to buy a piece of every stock in a market index, like the S&P 500. Because there is no manager to pay, the fees are practically zero. We are talking 0.03 or 0.05%. By owning an index fund, you own American capitalism. As the economy grows, you grow. Historically, the S&P 500 has returned an average of about 10% annually over long periods. When you look at your 401k options, I want you to ignore the marketing names and look for the keywords index, 500, or total market. If you see a large company growth fund with a 0.8% fee, avoid it. If you see an S&P 500 index fund with a 0.04% fee, that is your winner. If you want a simple but powerful strategy, consider the three-fund portfolio. You choose a U.S. total stock market index, an international index, and a bond index. You decide the percentages based on your age. By doing this manually rather than using a target date fund, you can cut your fees by 80 or 90%. You become the architect of your own return. This is not just about saving money. It is about ensuring that the growth of the global economy actually ends up in your bank account instead of being skimmed off by intermediaries. At this point, you might be so disgusted by the fees that you are tempted to stop contributing entirely and just use a brokerage app on your phone. Do not do that. Your 401k has one redeeming quality that overrides almost all of its flaws: the employer match. Failing to maximize the match is one of the most destructive financial mistakes you can make. Imagine your employer offers a match of 100% on the first 5% of your salary. If you make $100,000 and put in $5,000, they give you another $5,000. That is a guaranteed, risk-free, 100% return on investment on day one. There is no investment on earth that can beat that. Even if your 401k has terrible options with high fees, a 100% immediate return mathematically obliterates the negative impact of those fees in the short term. The golden rule is simple. Always contribute exactly enough to get the maximum match, not a penny less. Leaving that money on the table is the same as taking a voluntary pay cut. However, there is a catch you need to be aware of, and it is called the vesting schedule. If you do not understand your vesting, the match might just be a mirage that disappears when you leave the company. The money your employer puts into your account does not belong to you immediately. It is subject to a vesting schedule, which companies use to keep you from quitting. There are two main types you need to check in your HR manual. First is cliff vesting. You get 0% of the match until you hit a specific anniversary, usually 3 years. If you quit at 2 years and 11 months, you lose every single penny of the match. It vanishes. The second type is graded vesting, where you gain ownership in percentages over time, like 20% each year. I have seen people leave jobs for a small raise somewhere else, not realizing they were 2 weeks away from vesting $10,000 in their 401k. They essentially paid $10,000 to change jobs. You need to know your cliff. Before you ever hand in a resignation letter, log into your benefits portal and find your vesting status. If you are close to a threshold, it is almost always worth staying a few extra weeks to secure that money. It is your money. You earned it through your labor. But the rules are written to favor the employer if you are not paying attention. Being aware of these timelines is a critical part of the 401k escape plan. Do not let them take back what you have already worked for. Understanding the trap does nothing if you do not take action. Changing your 401k allocation is a high anxiety task for most people because the platforms are clunky and the warnings are scary. Let us demystify the process. It takes less than 15 minutes. First, log into your portal and find the tab that says Change Investments or Manage Elections. Here is the part people mess up. You usually have to make two distinct changes. One is for your future contributions, which dictates where your next paycheck goes. The other is for your current balance, which sells the funds you already own and buys new ones. If you only change your future elections, your existing $50,000 balance remains trapped in the old, high-fee funds. You must select the option to reallocate your current balance and your future contributions. Because 401ks are tax-advantaged, selling funds inside the account does not trigger any capital gains taxes. You can trade as much as you want without the IRS taking a cut. Sell the high-fee actively managed funds and buy the low-cost index funds you identified earlier. Once you hit confirm, you have effectively given your future self a multi-$100,000 raise. It is the most productive 15 minutes you will spend all year. Do not let the clunky interface stop you from taking control of your financial destiny. What if your 401k truly sucks? I'm talking about plans where every single fund has an expense ratio over 1% and there are no index funds at all. This often happens at small companies. You still have options. First, Check if your plan offers a brokerage window, sometimes called a PICRA or self-directed brokerage account. This feature allows you to link your 401k to a standard brokerage like Schwab or Fidelity. Once linked, the walls of the garden fall down. You are no longer restricted to the 15 crappy funds your employer chose. You can use your 401k money to buy almost any ETF or stock on the open market, unlocking dirt-cheap options like Vanguard VOO. If that is not an option, remember that your 401k is only a trap as long as you work there. The moment you leave, you can perform a direct rollover into an individual retirement account or IRA at a discount broker of your choice. In an IRA, you have absolute freedom and zero management fees. Never leave an old 401k behind. It is like leaving a car in an expensive parking garage you no longer visit. The fees will continue to eat your money, and you might even lose track of the account. People lose billions of dollars in forgotten 401ks every year. Taking that money with you when you change jobs is the ultimate way to ensure it stays in your control and continues to grow under your rules. The final trap of the 401k is not mathematical, it is behavioral. Because your account is tied to the stock market, you will experience crashes. In 2008 and 2020, people saw their balances drop by 40%, and they panicked. They hit the sell button and moved their money to a stable value fund to stop the bleeding. This is the ultimate mistake. A market crash is not when you lose money. A market crash is just when assets go on sale. You only lose money if you sell. If you hold an index fund, you still own the same number of shares. When the market drops, your paycheck is actually buying more shares at a discount. If you want to dive deeper into these behavioral strategies and get priority access to my insights, I invite you to click the Join button and become one of the optimizers. Our members get custom badges and priority replies to their questions, helping you stay steady when the market gets shaky. Remember, the investors who panicked in 2008 locked in their losses and missed the longest bull market in history. The 401k is a long game. Once you have set up a low-cost strategy, the best thing you can do is stop looking at it. Let compound interest do the heavy lifting while you live your life. Your 401k only feels like a trap when you are in the dark. Once you turn on the lights, read the fine print, and refuse to pay unnecessary fees, the trap dissolves. You are no longer an accidental investor. You are the architect of your own financial independence. To recap your checklist: secure the match, audit your expense ratios, reallocate to low-cost index funds, and know your vesting schedule. If you have questions about a specific fund or a weird fee you found on your statement, drop it in the comments. I read through them to see what the industry is up to lately, and your question might help someone else in the same boat. We are building a community of people who refuse to be a statistic in a Wall Street report. Do the math, take the 15 minutes to fix your allocation, and then get back to what matters. The system is designed to be confusing, but it is not impenetrable. You have the tools, you have the data, and now you have the plan. I will be here to help you navigate the next steps, but the first move is yours. Log in, find that disclosure document, and stop the bleed today. Your future self will thank you for the $300,000 raise you just gave them. I am Tom, and I will see you in the next one.